we're welcoming you to the show that is yours as well.
Yeah.
That's where we are.
Well, if you say welcome, I'll say welcome, Tom.
Well, let's crack on with that then. Well, welcome somehow. Welcome to mine. Welcome. I
Yes,
welcome myself.
as you sip your coffee.
Yeah, it's the way to do it. Um, where
Completely.
do you want to start this? Because I think there's so many places that we could do, could go. But like, actually, can I ask you a question to begin with this?
Yeah.
Okay, how did you get into the world of mindset?
Oh gosh. I feel like I've lived a million different lives at this point in a good way. But having started off as a lawyer working on the trading floor, investment banks, moving on into starting a company out in Asia, startup lifestyle tech, into now this wellness world that has completely opened up so many doors, not only for me, but I think also for other people. And the whole catalyst for, at least for me, was COVID out in Asia. And my experience of having lived through COVID in Asia made me realize how important mindset was and how that was linked to wellness, like capital W. um, how physical health, mental health, everything is sort of linked, and how we were taught things growing up that were completely wrong. And it's no one's fault. It's just we're all discovering things. So that's a quick summary of how I got into it.
And where did that lead you? Because there's so many. I feel like mindset is kind of branching off into loads of different avenues right now.
Yeah.
And I work in three areas really. Nervous system regulation is like that's where we initially connected around the ice baths,
Yep.
and then kind of the psychological aspect. What are your stories? What's the unconscious saying? Kind of what are the limiting beliefs you have? All that kind of stuff, and then a more philosophical lens. And like that's the way I personally view it. But like, what was your way into this, and how did you? Yeah, how those initial steps look for you?
Originally, my CNS was completely overloaded. I didn't know what was happening. But out in Asia, COVID started very early. And there were a lot of strict measures in place in order to try and contain it. I was out in Hong Kong at the time, loving it, loving life in Hong Kong. But when COVID hit, they started restraining what you could do more and more. And it became all about the number of cases that were being released, a lot of fear surrounding it. And all of a sudden, it became what I would call a lockdown, which is, number of visits per day completely limited, not being able to go to the beach or to the pool, not being able to go to the gym because they were closed. I couldn't run my business because of the nature of the business, which was to send therapists to people's homes. My world was sort of closing in more and more and more. And I'm quite sensitive to energy. I'm HSP, which is highly sensitive person, which is a character trait where you feel a lot of things and your CNS gets overwhelmed very easily by lights and things like that. So I just was in survival mode. And because it started early, this happened for years. And then after Hong Kong, I moved to Singapore where I had to serve quarantine in a hotel for 14 days and I
That
didn't have
sounds pretty
access
savage.
to fresh air. Yeah, it really was. I had to do it and I accepted it and I knew it was going to be hard, but I didn't know how badly it would affect me. I think with time, I've come to realize two things. One, I need fresh air. And two, I was so against what was being done and how it was being done that I got very frustrated that I couldn't do anything about it. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a lawyer at heart, and I truly believe in human rights. And locking up people, I think, should only be done in certain very regulated situation. So I was just put in a situation where it was just the perfect storm. And during that time, the only thing that got me through the quarantine, those 14 days, was having workout equipment with me. I was lucky enough where someone had delivered rower and some weights and a barbell. And all I did was focus on that. And it's what got me out of it. And as you get more and more serious, I think, with regards to sport, you realize that mindset has everything to do with it. How you see life, how you see yourself, how you approach things, the negative talk, the positive talk, everything, the people you surround yourself with. And that was very much the catalyst for me putting a lot of energy into my mindset. And don't get me wrong, I'm not there 100%. There are days where I can't control my mindset and I'm really trying. But I think at the end of the day, just like fitness, mindset is a moving target where you think you've gotten there, but then something else gets thrown at you, or you got stronger, but then something else happens. You try to chase it as much as possible. Um, yeah, mindset is a moving target and I'm still chasing it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. When you say your business was sending therapists around people's houses, what kind of therapists?
Yeah, so it was actually in beauty. So
Okay, yeah,
it was all, lashes, hair, makeup,
yeah.
that sort of thing. I saw a hole in the market in Hong Kong, went for it
Mhm.
and ran it for 6 years and was sponsored by Benefit Cosmetics and Amika. I absolutely loved what I was doing, but unfortunately with COVID, had to close shop.
Yeah, that sounds like a an interesting path to go from law to startup to wellness. Like there's quite the kind of you start in almost like extreme one side, and then you kind of pull back to the other side, where very kind of like high demand, intellectual strain, like kind of really kind of that kind of grind it out mentality, and then to not even fitness but wellness in your terms. It's a really interesting transition.
Yeah, I think it's about coming back to the middle, but also those are very all different parts of my personality. And what I like about what I'm doing now is I'm with my consulting firm called Growth to Mindset. I help companies grow, but I also help people grow. And I feel like I'm able to draw on my experience as being a lawyer with all the legal stuff that I'm helping brands with. I can also draw on my experience as a founder with trying to run and grow a company. And I help companies with their own problems that deal with that as well. But then my interest in wellness, which is the umbrella that covers growth to mindset. It's all about wellness in the end and helping people. Because after all my interest in helping my mindset, I started getting certified in by the American College of Sports Medicine, precision nutrition, etc. And I do corporate wellness workshops. So it's all about growth for companies and growth for people, which is very important to me. So I feel like I've completely come to a point where I'm able to add all of my experiences and use them. And this is what I was meant to be doing in the first place.
It's funny, isn't it? You go through all these different moments where you think, "Oh, well, this isn't it. This isn't it. Why am I doing this? This is a kind of waste of time, or this is something that I shouldn't have been doing," and it feels very misaligned. And then you piece all the pieces together, and they kind of, oh, it forms a really nice picture, and that's what I'm supposed to be doing all this time. And Cal Newport calls it acquiring career capital. Like you go
Hmm.
out and you're like, okay, well, this is my rare skill set that I've put together in all these disparate fields, and they've actually served me for this. And I think there's almost like a hesitancy to jump around, and it
Hmm.
needs to be a fine balance because you can't just switch tasks when something gets difficult or you meet resistance. But there needs to be a kind of a pushing and a left and right kind of feel before you find what's really you. The chances of finding it when you're straight out of college or university or whatever are almost zero. But to go to bounce around, well, personally, I found that useful, and everyone that I work with has found it useful too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I always felt like I was meant to be where I was. I was meant to go to law school. In fact, I have two law degrees. I was meant to do that. I wanted to do that. I loved it. I was meant to work on the trading floor. I was meant to start a startup. And they were big chunks of my life. They were at least 6 years each. And I truly believe that, especially today, more and more, it's actually more accepted to look at someone's resume and see that they've done a bunch of things. In fact, when I hire, I look at two things. I don't care where you went to school. I really don't care. What's very important to me is that one, you tried things. You actually tried. And I don't care whether you failed or not, you actually tried it. And two, it's in different industries. I look for that because I want someone who is curious and who is willing and brave enough to take the jump. I'm not talking about someone who's jumping every year, every 2 years. I'm talking about someone who really tried and said, okay, I learned this much. This wasn't for me. What can I do with it now? And I think it's celebrated more and more these days.
Hmm. Definitely, definitely.
And you've made a
I can
jump.
100% see that. Yeah, a few, a few.
Yeah.
From I always felt like the opposite aspect of that, where I was never quite satisfied, never quite ticking the box, never quite aligned until recent times. The military felt like something that was such a useful skill set to develop and such an important and meaningful thing to do. But I was always displaying a persona instead of finding a version of authentic version of me that I could kind of deploy. And then personal training and CrossFit and like coaching and all these different environments, very similar thing. It was part of me, useful, great to learn to coach people, and I kind of picked up these skill sets. But it was never something that I was like, this is my be all and end all, because there's always this mentality piece. And then I started Mindset RX, and that was fantastic. We worked with some amazing CrossFit athletes of all different levels, from the very pinnacle of the sport all the way down to people just starting out, and who all found their mentality was the thing that stopped them and it was their biggest limiting factor. But it still was like the times that I absolutely adored helping people, and the times that I actually got the best results for people, when it was kind of about CrossFit, but not really about CrossFit. And they wanted to just grow as an individual. And that led me down like the kind of the helping the gym owners, the box owners, the personal trainers, and like the people, and then eventually a few people who are kind of like, I worked for a CFO of a Fortune 500 company and like helped him, and really kind of found this entrepreneurial drive. And it's like, okay, that's what it's all about. It's all about freedom, and it's all about growth, and it's all about however you define adventure. And I was like, that's it. And it's almost like it required me to go down all those paths of that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. And then eventually like, oh, this seems to be really aligned. And it's like aligned with that genuine intellectual curiosity I have, that thing that's like, I adore this. I love this kind of the the educational aspect about it, but it's what I think about every day, all day. Like, why do we do the things we do? Like, why? Like, what? Why do we limit ourselves? Why don't we blow past those? Why do we fall into traps that we don't want to be part of? And like, that's what sets my mind alight, and that's what's like speaks to my soul of let's train you to be the best version of you possible, because we have this, I think in the back of our mind, we have this kind of ideal conception of ourselves, the one that you kind of see and you go like, that's the version of me that I rarely glimpse. And I know it's there, but it's like, we know it. We really know it. And it's somewhere stored in the back of our mind. It's like, can we myelinate the pathways that strengthen that? Can we connect to that version of ourselves over time? Like, and it's always been about that for me. When I look back at it with the military, it was all about doing that for myself. When it was in CrossFit, it was always like a metaphor for helping people find that and strengthen that pathway and connecting to themselves. And same thing with coaching mindset with CrossFit athletes, is the same thing. It's like, let's connect it. And like, that's always been the thing that's been deeply embedded.
Mm. Do you feel like we self-impose limitations based off of experience, maybe trauma?
Yes. Yes. And I think it's one of those. So I think that the way the unconscious seems to work to me is we need to simplify all our experiences into stories, because we remember stories very easily. And that can be a snap judgment of, if I feel like this, that equals threat, and that can be varying levels of trauma. I think there's also the kind of the Jungian concept, Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, and I think the name doesn't do it any favors because the collective unconscious, I think, sounds like we all share one consciousness. But what I interpret that as, and I believe Carl Jung meant it as, is there's kind of like characters, he calls them archetypes, that are built into us that express themselves when they are in the right environments and when we have a clear vision of them. So for example, like the king is one archetype that we will have, like the ruler, the disciplinarian, the kind of order structure, but also provider and um rules and structure and order and discipline. So we have that in us, and if we're not put around the right environments and we don't see a version of that, and also if we can't connect it in ourselves and we don't have the right kind of opportunities to present it, then we never develop that aspect of us. We never develop that archetype into to it is. So I think there's trauma, and I'm not so sure about micro trauma. Like I think that's a little bit wishy-washy, but also like there's some truth to it. There's something in it that's right, and then there's something on it in it that is victimhood. I think there's a delineation between there, and then I think in the unconscious as well, there's like another layer beneath, and like that's those archetypes.
What do you mean by victimhood?
I feel like there's a certain percentage of the population right now that are very comfortable playing the victim, and it serves a purpose of look at me, give me some attention, and it's kind of comfortable. I spoke about this with a friend because we mentioned that we both experienced it, and we said it's like this warm blanket of victimhood that you can put on. I'm just like, there's nothing I can do about this, and it feels like really safe because you don't have to try anything. You don't have to own up to the fact that yes, you are insufficient and you're not everything you could be, which is
Mm,
terrifying. But I think I view that as an invitation to be a bit more than I could be. Like that kind of, you're not everything you could be. Well, how can you be better? Let's train
mm.
your character. Let's train your soul.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I think in my life, but also in the world, we've seen sort of a pattern. And let me know if you agree, but before it was all about logic, less about listening to your emotions. It was all, for example, you'll sleep when you die, you have to work, all that stuff, emotions, you shouldn't listen to them. But then I do think COVID accelerated this. On the flip side now, there's a lot of leaning into your emotions, which is also linked to your psyche, your well-being, obviously under the umbrella of wellness. Um, I do think that we've gone from one extreme to the other, and I do think we need to come back to the middle without ignoring both ends of the spectrum. I think it's really important to listen to those emotions and perhaps under victimhood, leaning into the fact that, hey, this sucks and I feel a certain way and I'm really down, but also listening to the other side of the spectrum, which is let's get out of this. How do we get out of this? I do think that before we used to be desensitized, and now we've kind of come to the point of, oh, it's okay to feel these things and sit in them. But I am very cognizant of the fact that it's very hard when you're on either ends of the spectrum to get out of that. And that's where realizing that you might need help, whether it's through friends or an expert like you, to help you get out of that. But I don't want to be insensitive to the fact that when you're in those positions, it's very hard to get out. I've been in probably once or twice in my life where I was really down in a deep hole emotionally, and you perhaps know that you need certain things to get out, but you don't have the energy to do it yet. So I just think the more we recognize that we can be on a stretch of the spectrum, the better, instead of saying this is right or this is wrong. Do you
Yeah.
agree?
Yeah. There's you can look at that from a few lenses. Nietzsche at one point said God is dead, and what he meant is the religious worldview is dying, and the religious worldview says everything has meaning and everything is divine and everything has emotional salience to it. And we replace that with the scientific worldview of everything's quantifiable, everything's measurable, and we're just a system of inputs and outputs. Reality is, I think we're both. We
Mm.
have both the emotional and the rational lens. And the Taoists figured this out years ago, yin and yang. Like we have the masculine, the drive, the action, the force, the discipline, the very masculine archetypes. And then we have the feminine, rest, nurturing, compassion, softness, gentleness, patience, wisdom. And it's the combination of the two. And it's almost like when you brace two sides of an arch, when you have both of them strength, like in strength, they support each other and they reinforce each other. But when both are lax, or when one is dominating and one's untrained, that's when the imbalance happens. Like you look at the 90s and that was like Richard Dawkins, like that kind of purely rational, like if science can't prove it, then there's nothing that's wrong with it. And then you kind of look at this big swing that we've had now where it's like, I think the people who have gone further than the likes of Gabor Mate, where it's like, where everything is a trauma and there's a sense of victimhood that comes with it. And I think both of those are like, they're both, there's, is the truth turned up to 20 instead of 10. And it's like, it's blown out of proportion. So I think they have to both be combined at the same time.
So when an athlete or a CEO comes up to you with X problem, do you go about finding a solution from a logical standpoint and an emotional standpoint, or do you choose one over the other based on the person?
I see where they're at, and I try and have just a real combination. A real conversation with them. I find that when I'm really listening and feeling at the same time, the right answers come. I find that
Mm.
when I'm in a conversation, it's a very it's a very feeling led thing, and the more I think about structures, the worse the session will go, and the more I allow myself to just um, be played as opposed to consciously coming up with things, I think the answers come out a little bit better. And then there comes a point where it's like, well, what are your habits that we need to enforce? And how can we train discipline? So it really depends on the person that we work with. I put them through a testing phase, and that looks like we test the nervous system regulation and like what's your HRV, what's your sleep patterns. Let's put you some breath testing protocols. Let's look at your sleep. Let's look at all these things. Then we do some journaling type stuff, plus a conversation that I've had to apply to work with me. And then there's a questionnaire as well. And that all feeds into both of those sides simultaneously. It's, um, yeah, so it's both of them.
Mm. So what's the most important lesson that you've learned from working with your clients? The most important.
God, trying to summarize that into one
It's
thing.
hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. Everything sounds trite when you try and summarize it into one. I think I'm grasping at things as opposed to trying to express one thing on knowing one thing. I think there's probably an element of one size fits one, and there's principles that carry, but this is you, and you're a unique person with your experiences and your background and your genetic profile and your idea of success. And if it doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work, no matter what someone says. No matter whether Andrew Huberman said it's the best protocol for you, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And no matter whether Jordan Peterson has prescribed it to all these people, it doesn't matter, because it needs to work for you. If it's written in Taoist scripture, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work for you. It's one size fits one. What about you? What's the thing that you keep coming back to in mindset? Like, is there something that you consistently think of, like, oh, this is the one that I remind myself of, or the one that I need to adhere to better?
I think ultimately, and this is also why I started the podcast, I've come to realize through others and through my own experiences that everyone's winging it. It always seems
Yeah,
like everyone has everything together, especially on social media. No one's posting about their failures, right? They're mostly posting about their successes. People share mostly their successes also face to face. Even when you ask someone how are you, it's always like, oh, I'm good. How are you? They'll never actually say, no, I'm actually having a really bad day, and this is why. I think ultimately people are just figuring stuff out on the fly. There's no manual to life. No one's doing it better. I think ultimately just stay in your lane. Comparison is a thief of joy. Figure out what works for you. And it goes kind of hand in hand with what you were saying about certain recovery protocols won't work for you, even if they work for 1,000 other people. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. Same thing goes with nutrition. Same thing goes with a training methodology. Same thing goes with your career, your relationships. I think at the end of the day, we're sort of become desensitized to our own inner voice and what our gut is saying, and have completely sort of thrown ourselves into a deep end of looking at what other people are doing and what works for them. So I always say come back to the middle, which is always come back to yourself and see what works for you. And I have to remind myself of this as well, because I talk to a lot of people. I always ask their opinions, but I think at the end of the day, listen to them, but also listen to what your own inner voice is saying and follow that.
yeah, that's really fascinating. Really fascinating about listening to your guts. I think that's more of the softening and the quietening. A lot of people initially come to me because they want to be more disciplined and structured, and it's like, I want to get more shit done. Essentially, it's like, this is important to me, and I'm finding myself falling by the wayside. And I think there's a suspicion that I'm gonna be some combination of Jocko Willink and David Goggins, and
Hmm.
just like make them do stuff and scream at them.
Hmm.
And they're very surprised when I'm like, well, we need to slow down and do less and focus on quality, and then maybe we can ramp things up. But when I really speak to them, and when they are really willing to hear it, what they're craving is to give in to that internal voice that says, slow down,
Hmm.
be present, be more than do. And that some people aren't craving that. Some people, like, who don't want to work with the likes of you and I, or like have a different life path, just want to crush, 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 crush. And that's the like the very rare I don't know, Steve Jobses of the world,
Hmm.
who just want to do, and that's great. But I think the majority of people who anyway come to work with me want a calm mind and clarity of thought, and that comes from slowing down, and that allows you to be intentional and deliberate and effective, which gets you where you want to be, rather than this anxious rush of stress and anxiety and scarcity driven behavior.
Completely. I actually think it's linked to the fact that we're not made for the world that we built. There's too much going on, too much. Like, think about it. When you're going down there, you're driving. There's so many, you're going at high speed. There's so many cars. There's like banners coming at you. There are lights, and then you have your phone going off, and then you have the music. Like, we are not meant to be checking our phones every time there's a notification. We are meant to be outside looking at greenery. We are meant to be in nature. We are meant to basically not be watching TV, but actually spending time with people, connecting. I'm not saying that the world we built is bad. I think we just need to figure out how to deal with this world and still connect to who we are inside. And that to me means slowing down, taking time to put your phone away. Which I completely am aware of the fact that I built a business based off of social media, which is, so I know that I'm saying get off your phone, but then I'm saying get on your phone, right?
Hmm.
So I'm very much aware of that, but I think in order for us to be happy, we need to be able to figure out a way of balancing both and realize that you need to take a step away from things sometimes. And little things, it's interesting. Like, let's talk about nutrition. People think that the way they eat makes them feel good. They're like, oh, I feel good. I feel amazing. I've got energy, blah, blah, blah. I always tell them, try eating like farmers do or like your grandparents used to eat and see how that makes you feel. We're so like go, go, go. You don't even realize that you don't feel good because this is your new normal. If you actually
Hmm.
take a step back and eat the way your body was built for you to eat, and also do certain recovery protocols like even just walking or just being in nature, you actually realize, oh wow, I actually felt like shit. That's actually
Hmm.
not how I'm supposed to be feeling at all. And some people say, oh, I don't need to sleep. I'm fine with like 5 hours of sleep per night. You may be. I mean, there's an exception to the rule, absolutely, but you weren't built that way. So imagine if you were getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Try it. See how you feel then. See how productive you are. And again, not everything that I'm saying will apply to everyone, right? I'm always about listening to your inner voice and what works for you. But I would say try because the normal that you've created, I'm willing to bet to a certain degree, isn't the normal for your body and how we were made to function. So I challenge people, try doing it for about 2, 3 weeks, see how you feel.
Yeah. There's an intuition that we have that is so wise that we have stopped listening to, that we've kind of put a limit on it because we don't trust it. It's almost like that religious worldview that I was talking about earlier. Like we
Hmm.
don't trust it, and we don't trust our emotions, and we don't
Hmm.
trust the wisdom that they have. And inside that, like, is the answer to so many solutions, but it requires this kind of self leadership of I am going to assert myself over myself. I'm going to listen to the true self, not the ego, but the true self that wants the best for me, and say, this is what I'm doing. And that is exceptionally hard. Like,
Hmm.
it's really, really hard to do. But one of the things that really stood out as you're talking just then was that immersion in nature, that feeling of I'm feeling, whether it's hot or cold or hunger or tiredness or the effect that light has on me or like difficulty and challenge. Like that is one of the reasons that I'm going to be heading out to Pakistan in a couple of weeks, because I know 2 weeks living at 4,000 meters of altitude is going to, I'm going to come back from that a better version of myself. And I know it because I always find that version of myself in there. It's like it requires that natural rhythm to live by, and it requires hardship, and it requires real connection and real conversation and an exposure to nature that I don't get even when I'm talking to you here and like having a great conversation. I don't get that,
Hmm.
and it's like we're yearning for it. We're yearning for that stability that the other part of us will provide.
Completely. I agree. And I look back at my life and there are moments in time where I wish I had the maturity to realize what effect nature was having on me. I remember when I was 19, I took a trip with friends to Morocco and went to the Sahara Desert for the first time. And we spent the night in the desert. And I remember waking up and opening my eyes and seeing the most beautiful colors. Because you're in the desert, right? The orange sand reflecting sunlight. And you see the colors change as the sun comes up. And I just realized, I remember I wrote a essay just on that in college. And because it was just so touching. And now being my 30 something self, looking back at that moment, I wish I realized just how important being in awe of something, especially nature, was so important. Like genuinely does something to me in the most positive sense. Um, and I think the more people sort of lean into that, the better. Just these experiences. You going to Pakistan, you always told me in our conversations that you love mountains. Like just find that thing just that you look at in nature and that just gives you awe. And there's this whole study on what being in awe does to your soul. Well, to your body, but I'm translating that to your soul. Um, I remember, when was it? 2 years ago, I decided to jump out of an airplane in Dubai over the Palm. And I'm completely, deathly afraid of heights, still am, which is ironic because I'm very tall. But I think that just adds to the height looking down. But I remember being very calm in the plane going up because I was in awe of what I was seeing because the plane doors were open and I was first in line, so I had the most beautiful view. And I just remember seeing colors and again the sand because it's in the desert. And then you have the blue from the sea, and then you see the palm and you see the buildings. It was just so beautiful that I was so calm in a situation that I would say would put my CNS in overdrive. And even during, like, as we were about to jump out and during the drop, I was so calm. And in fact, I had my whoop. So it's actually metrics to this jump. And it didn't even go above 100 beats per minute. It just, my heart stayed really low, BPM. And it just shows that there are certain things that you can do in nature that counter a lot of things that you might normally feel. So you found your mountains, I found my desert. A lot of people, it's the ocean. And I think the more you get out there, the more you find tools that will help you be a calmer, perhaps happier version of yourself.
I love the focus on awe. I
Mm.
think that's a really beautiful thing to bring to life. Like I think we bypass that. And if you were like, there's a certain falsity to the sentence of living a natural life because this is a natural life. We've created all these things around us. Like we've done that is part of our ecology in some way. But if we were living a a hunter gatherer lifestyle, you would have that sense of awe more frequently. You would sit in like sit in that state of stillness and observe where you're at, and it'd probably be a little bit more terrifying, but there would be that sense like, man, this is incredible. This
Hmm.
moment here, this place here is incredible. And even being in touch with the seasons and being able to watch each day the evolution of what's happening and what's slowing down and what's starting, that's a super special thing to do and to have that all within it.
I wonder if it's because, and I'm no psychologist whatsoever, but I wonder if being in awe of something makes us realize how small we are, and as a consequence, how little our worries are. And so it kind of diminishes the aspect of perhaps anxiety that we might get from those. I don't know. I don't know. I guess that's just an open question. What do you think?
No, there's definitely a sense of that. There's something that astronauts get when they go to space and come back, and I can't remember what it's called, like little blue dots or something like that. It's when you
Hmm.
see the Earth as this tiny speck in this infinite universe, and you realize how A, precious Earth and life is, and B, how insignificant we are.
Hmm.
And that seems to shake people to the core. And I can imagine that can be very positive or it can be terrifying at the same time. There's been a few times in my life where I've really realized how small and insignificant we can be. Some of those have been like one was in an earthquake when I was a kid, and that was like a big moment of like, oh, we're not in control of this. We're in Greece, and I was like looking at all these buildings trembling around me and stuff just falling to the earth. I was like, we're not in control of this earth. Like it takes us when it wants to take us, and there's been a couple of plant medicine things that I've done, which have been a kind of like, oh, like this has really shown me the smallness of what we are, and then also like the loss of loved ones as well. When you realize
Mm,
that this is really insignificant, but I think that's almost like a different kind of awe, a kind of a, you see your life in full perspective instead of in the urgency of day to day. I've got to
mm.
get my shit done right now and tick my boxes and get out of here. And that seems at odds to the way that, I don't know, I personally want to live my life. I don't know about you.
No, I like the way you say that. And I guess people listening to you right now might be like, okay, he has his stuff figured out. What is it that you haven't figured out?
Oh no, I've got it all figured out. I've figured out everything, everything, like everything I haven't figured out. I think I figured some stuff out. I think I've got a good lens
Mm,
on the why we do things we do, like more so than most people, less than the best. But like I'm kind of getting out. What don't I have figured out? The thing that I'm working on right now is that's a beautiful question, by the way. I really like that. Is how to really balance the slowness and stillness of um, of being present and coming from a place of love and abundance with hardcore getting shit done, training hard,
yeah.
crushing business goals. Like I've learned the military way before, and that's fantastic. But you're being trained to, well, to put it bluntly, to go and kill people, and that's not what the day to day living is. Um, and it's not what you need in business, especially when you're trying to help people live a better life and become a better version of themselves. So like it's that balance of doing both simultaneously, the living in the masculine and the feminine, like the yin and the yang. And that's what I'm working towards. I'm far better than I was, but I don't know, and I don't think you can say, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm absolutely doing it. But that's like my real focus right now.
Mm, I like that. It's interesting because I feel like my focus is a bit similar. Obviously, our backgrounds are different, but I feel like I was very much in survival mode um, towards the end of my chapter in Asia. That now that I've come back to the US and felt like I did the work that I needed to do and I feel like myself again, I have to sort of allow myself to be happy, allow myself to be genuine in everything that I'm doing and find a balance between, again, what some may call masculine and feminine energies. Because I don't want to lose that emotional side that I developed towards the end of my chapter in Asia, just leaning into my emotions a lot and um, being very true to myself, but also ramping up the business side of things and being very logical and getting stuff done. I want to find a balance between the two. Not only my personal life, but also in my work life, everything. And it's hard sometimes because what I find with life is that you may think you're doing okay, but then life will just throw stuff at you. It's quite volatile. So you have to keep dodging stuff while still feeling okay and doing okay. It's really hard. I mean, life throws so much shit at you daily. And some days are easier than others, and some problems are bigger than others, but ultimately you're constantly dodging and all the while trying to find a balance within you, being happy. And I just find that life can be very beautiful, but also very hard. And it's just about finding what works for you, finding that balance. And it's not the easiest.
Something I've been studying recently is how the there's something called the monomyth, which is Joseph Campbell's idea of like the hero's journey, which is, if you look at every great story ever told about a hero, it all follows the same pattern. And the reason why is because it's trying to teach you something about yourself and how we go through life. And there's the call to adventure and the refusal of it. So it's like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to leave the job role as a lawyer and I'm going to go on myself. Like, and then there's the refusal, which initially happens, and that leads you all through these different stages of like someone, probably an advisor, coming to you, all the way to, like you mentioned, there's a few stages there. One of them that you mentioned is at the end of that Asia situation for you. That sounds like what's known as the belly of the whale, which is a descent into your unconscious, where you have to shine a light on all the parts of you that you'd rather not see, all your biggest insecurities, your fears, the things that bring you shame, the difficulty. Some people call it the dark night of the soul, that real tough period where it seems like there is no way out. But the descent into the kind of, you think about what the sea represents, that's where we came from. That's creation itself. That's the primordial ooze. Like that's where we come from. That is like the salty creation. It's like the mother. So we descend into that, and then we go through kind of a rebirth period, and from there we go into what's traditionally known as the road of trials, where you're presented trial after trial after trial. And the analogy I like is in The Hobbit with Bilbo Baggins. He
Hmm.
leaves the Shire, he leaves Hobbiton, and he instantly forgets his handkerchief. And it's like, oh, that's the worst thing. So we need to go back. It's like, we don't have time for that. And then it starts raining. And he's like, well, this is the first time he's really been out alone in the rain. And then he meets giants, and like each step progressively gets tougher and demands far more of him and pushes him to his limits. But each step sequentially prepares him for the next. And it sounds like that's the kind of stage you're describing there, of like it demands so much of us, and it's so difficult, and it feels like, when is this ever going to end? But there's a point to it, and that is to forge you into the best version of you. And as a friend of mine, Andrew Tracy, posted this morning on social media, but he said it loads of times, it's not about whether you get to the goal or not, it's about how you walk the path. That's the thing that matters. And like, this moment right now, this is the path, how you
Hmm.
conduct this, and that's what really truly counts in this.
I love this. And it's interesting because I've always told my friends, but also some clients, my darkest of days turned into my biggest successes. It's a pattern that I've seen in my life. I'll go deep, deep, deep down in a hole, but then literally jump out as if something was chasing me. And it's happened twice in my life. And I always tell this story because when things are bad, even though it might be hard to see, it's an opportunity for things to get even better than they were before. And it's going to take a lot of work, like you were talking about, shining light on certain things in within yourself that you would rather not see. And it's very painful. Um, but ultimately, you'll come out of it a better person and in a better situation. But all of that, I try not to, whoever's in that deep, dark hole at this current time, I don't want to just sort of push their feelings away. I think it's all about validating those feelings as they're feeling them now and just helping them process them in order to serve as a platform for them to jump up and really realize how much better things can become. And I think ultimately life is about those patterns. It'll be repeating. There will be those patterns throughout life, but it's literally giving you an opportunity to become better.
Yeah. In one of the pieces of The Hobbit, Bilbo goes into the goblins' tunnels, and you think about, that's the descent into the underground.
Mhm.
And then he's knocked unconscious, he's left behind in the dark. And that is like the terrifying bit. He's all alone. He's going to do it himself. There's no one that's going to do the work for him. He is in real danger. Like, there's genuine threat. It's not kind of a it's not the equivalent of being in the gym where you can just quit it. There's
Yeah.
something on the line, and he has to find within himself the capacities that are always there waiting, those archetypes that we talked about at the beginning. He has to find those waiting to be expressed. They're within him, waiting to come alive, and they're the things that were they're laying dormant, like latent within him. And that's where he finds the ring. That's where he finds Gollum. That's where he finds the ring. That's where he finds his ultimate prize. And that's the same thing with us. We find the prize in that darkest times, and it's usually the thing that got us in there in the first place, and the thing that's a bit shit, and the thing that we would rather be without turns out to be the thing that sets us free. And all those things that bring you shame, all those things that bring you such discomfort and such pain, those are the things that create the freedom in the long term. So it's shining a light, and you're absolutely right. It's seeing them, it's validating them, it's accepting them rather than rejecting them that we end up having to do.
So what was your latest prize? What's the most recent one?
My wife is pregnant, and that's the biggest
Oh,
prize ever. So I'm not sure that necessarily came from a descent into the underworld. But there's definitely, well, I suppose there's an element to like getting to know yourself and the fear associated with the kind of like, wow, this has got to be a thing. And like I've got to step up. But I wouldn't say that's from a real descent into the unknown, or not descent into the underworld or descent into the belly of the whale. It's more of a kind of like, maybe that is just the prize. Maybe that's the boon. Like, so at the end of the cycle of that hero's journey, the hero comes back with a gift that they get to pass on to their community, and maybe it's something around that. But we'll find out.
oh, I love it. And congrats to you and your wife.
Hey, thank you, thank you. It's exciting and terrifying, but exciting.
Yes. I'm sure, but I'm sure your kid will be very wise.
Well, we'll find out. Maybe they'll be like, screw this. Like, this is not what I'm into.
Maybe that'll be your lesson.
Yeah. That'll be a true test. A true test.
A true test, harder than any client you could ever get.
Oh yeah. The hardest client I've got is myself. I don't know whether
Ah,
you feel the same thing, but it's always like trying to get that perspective on yourself is so tough.
mm, very much so. And it's funny because I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but um, I can be quite black and white when it comes to giving advice. And a bunch of people will tell me, "Oh, but you're pretty harsh." Like, and I said, "Well, you should listen to my inner voice. It's even harsher." I always find that I'm actually harder on myself than I could ever be on anyone else. Even when it comes to emotions and things like that. And I try to be very patient with myself, but it ultimately, I think we're our own worst enemies, and the way we speak to ourselves, we would never, ever think of speaking to someone you love that way.
No,
Never.
of course not. It's reserved for just reserved for ourselves. One
Completely.
person who's most vulnerable to it
Yeah,
and can't get away
completely.
from it.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. We can't get away from ourselves, can we?
No, we're stuck with it, and that's the thing. Like, that's where we have to go. Well, this is a game of acceptance. There's no, and it's something I'm working really hard on right now as well. It's like
Mm,
that voice that I'd rather get rid of and rather never see again, and I want to control and restrict and wish it were never there. That's a part of me.
mm,
That's something that may have a gift associated with it, but if I sit with it and listen to it, it wants to keep me safe, or it wants to protect me, and it wants to look after me. And it's there because it served a purpose at one point. Like, there was
mm,
a phase that I did go through where I learned to put on this kind of like emotional armor, and I called the character Ian the Invincible. It's like Ian the
hmm
Invincible's along, like he's gonna not open himself up because that's a terrifying thing to do, and it's a protectionist kind of strategy. Um, but that was there for a reason. It served a purpose to a point, and then it's about that death and rebirth cycle that we started to talk about. It's like the phoenix rising from the ashes. It's like
mm,
you have to burn, and that's really painful. But then from that, if you allow it to happen and don't prolong it by wishing it didn't happen, if you just kind of go into the flames, that's when you emerge. That's when you come out
mm,
a better, probably vulnerable initially, but better version of you.
I really like these sort of visuals that you accompany your statements with, whether it's the adventure with the Hobbit or the Phoenix. I think it really just drives the point a lot. Maybe it's also because I'm a very visual person, but it's funny when you started talking about the adventure, I immediately thought, oh, like the Hobbit when he's about to go off on his
Yeah.
adventure. So that's pretty good. So obviously we've talked a lot about mindset. What would be the one thing that you'd want listeners to remember from what we talked about today?
The one thing would be seeing your path as that of the hero's journey, something that is there for you. And that may not even be true, but I think it's the most useful way to look at the world. I think we are crying out for meaning. Like, I genuinely think this is going to sound ridiculous to everyone, but I think that's why people are learning to love country music again, because there's a meaning in everything. It's like, yes, it's about this romantic worldview where a slow life and a kind of uh, yeah, this slow life and even depression and alcoholism and tractors have a romantic attachment to them, and it's like a
Hmm.
novel and it's poetry. And I think that's because we're crying out for meaning, and because meaning clears up what you're supposed to do, and it clears up how to act, and it turns something from incidental to intentional. So it happens to me rather than it happens for me.
Mm,
And when we get to that point of like, this is happening for me, this is a story that's kind of there for me, I think that massively serves us.
mm,
And I think that is, for me personally, what allows me to lean into life as opposed to retreating from it.
mm. I like that. I think it's maybe, I don't know, you tell me, quite telling that my two favorite country songs are She Thinks My Tractor's Sexy, and the other one's called Fancy, where he talks about taking his girl out on a date at Applebee's and drinking milkshake. So I don't know what you want to read into that,
Hey, I'm not going to
but
psychoanalyze you.
yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. I love what you're saying, and I think that's super important. And for me, it's very much, I guess, the most important thing that I'd like to remind clients and friends and family about mindset is very much just, again, listening to that inner voice. Stop comparing yourself to other people's successes, even failures. Just listen to what is right for you, and that will guide you even through your darkest days.
Love that. Love that. Where could people find you and your services on Instagram, websites, that kind of thing?
Yeah, on Instagram, they can follow me, deanne.u.ness, also growth2mindset.io on Instagram. And of course, we have websites, growth2mindset.com. What about you, Tom?
Sweet. At Tom Foxley is the best way to get hold of me. Just on Instagram. I'm trying to make my life simple and elegant rather than complicated with all different social media things. Have a website. It needs to be refreshed and redone. But
Hmm.
Tom Foxley, Foxley, that is the best way to get in touch.
Very good. And that's how Instagram is how we got in touch. It
Yeah,
works.
it does work. You can find some real interesting human beings through it. Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that.
Imagine that. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.